Hey friends, so a lot of people are interested in reading more classic literature or classic works of philosophy or poetry, but they don't know where to start. Maybe you find it overwhelming. There's so many things to choose from. Maybe you want to read some of these famous works to see what all the fuss is about, but some of them are really long, some of them are really dense and hard to understand. So where do you start? I can help you with that. My name is Dr. Andrew Moore. I'm Associate Professor of Great Books at St. Thomas University. I'm back again with my weekly series where I talk about books into a camera and you watch on your telephone. Nice to see you again. I can't see you. Nice to be seen. Nice to be here in my house on the internet. So like I said, I'm a university professor. For real, I've even got the fancy robes. I teach in a great books program. And what that means for you is that I've read a lot of books and I teach a lot of books. That's my job, to help people who don't know anything about these books know lots of things about these books. That's what they pay me for. So I can give you some guidance on this. The first thing you need to know is don't punish yourself. I think for a lot of people, there are these books they feel they need to read or they ought to read, and they try, and it's painful. If the goal here is that you want to read more classics, you want to read some of the great books, and you tried with James Joyce or Paradise Lost, something really, hefty, and you failed, and then you beat yourself up over it. Don't do that to yourself. If no one is forcing you to read these things, and you're finding it excruciating, don't do that to yourself. I promise you, there is more to read than you have life left to live. So we want to find some great books, some works of classic literature that actually interest you, and then we'll go from there. I promise we can find something that you will love. Now, it is just the case that older books written hundreds of years ago or works of philosophy, they can be tougher than your average read. This is why if you're trying to get into reading these things, one of the things that's really important is momentum. If you're trying to kind of change your intellectual diet, I think it's important to get some quick wins. For example, you don't necessarily need to begin with enormous 18th century novels or ancient epics. Think about different genres. Think about drama. Think about Greek tragedy, or think about Shakespeare. These plays are performed on the stage and they only take a few hours. So if you're reading them, they can only take so long. It's not going to take you weeks and weeks to finish. Poetry can be great in this way too. You can find collections of poems, read one every night before bed. Boom, you're reading the classics. But how do you know what to read? How do you know where to start with great books? One tip that a lot of people don't know about is to go online and search for a course syllabus. So you can look up course syllabi on medieval literature or Chinese philosophy. A lot of university professors, college professors will post their course outlines online. So you can see what books people are reading in courses on African literature or Renaissance literature or whatever. And I would say too, if you're looking to get into something like philosophy, but you're intimidated by these books, they can be dense, they can be complicated, they can be really, really long. Searching for a course outline can be really helpful there too, because professors will often indicate on their course outlines specific pages that they want their students to read. So if you're just a beginner, you're reading philosophy for the first time, this can be really helpful. If you're just looking for an introduction to a thinker, you may not have to read all 500 pages of their most famous book. And Googling course outlines can help you kind of zero in on the most important sections. I've been thinking about this a bit myself, about making some kind of checklist or recommended reading list for people. Is that something that anyone would be interested in? You could let me know in the comments. Maybe I could make such a thing. If you're the kind of person who wants to get into reading the classics, reading the great books, and you've struggled in the past, it may be worth thinking about whether or not you've had a bad experience in the past. I think a lot of people probably had like a bad high school experience reading Wuthering Heights or Hamlet, and so they're completely turned off old books. But there are a lot of old books, and there's a world of difference between The Great Gatsby and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And if you hated Jane Austen, you might love Virginia Woolf. So if you had some terrible experience with look, I love teachers. Not everybody has a great teacher. And so maybe you had just a really bad experience studying some book. It doesn't have to be that way. Don't let a really unpleasant group project that you had to do when you were 17 prevent you from accessing the world's storehouse of wisdom and beauty. Now, just a practical tip, let's talk about choosing the right edition. Not all editions of books are created equal. So especially with classic works of literature, with the great works of philosophy or political theory, whatever, you'll find that lots of different publishers put out editions of those works. So there'd be lots and lots of editions of the works of Descartes or something. And professors often take great care in choosing the editions that we assign to students, that we ask them to read. I find that the Penguin Classics series, they're pretty good. They're in these nice, kind of aesthetically pleasing black paperbacks. I use these editions quite a lot. They're relatively inexpensive. They're pretty durable. They hold up well. I know in my program where we're talking about like philosophy or political theory, we read a lot of these Hackett editions. Again, they're relatively inexpensive, and a lot of these works are in translation, right? If you're reading in English, and these translations tend to be pretty reputable. Now, I really like these Oxford World Classics. Again, all matching book covers. They look very nice together on the bookshelf. These are probably a little pricier, but the real virtue, the real advantage of these editions, they have, I think, generally the best notes. Especially, they're the ones I use whenever I teach Shakespeare. If I'm teaching Shakespeare, I find the Oxfords have the best notes. And this is one of the things to pay attention to when you're reading classic literature, when you're reading philosophy. A lot of these editions, especially these scholarly editions that we'd use in like a university classroom, have footnotes or endnotes. And those can be really helpful to you if you're a beginner, if you're reading this stuff for the first time, because if there's words or there's references that you don't understand, you can check the footnotes or you can check the endnotes, and an editor will explain that stuff to you. Another set of editions that's really helpful in this way, these Norton critical editions, these are pretty good. They give you good notes again, but the other thing that's nice about these is that at the back of every edition, the Norton critical editions, they have a selection of essays written by scholars, experts on the text you're reading. And so they will give you different approaches, different ways of understanding the text. There's these short interpretive essays. So if you're wondering like, well, how do I understand this text? What do people say about this text? What's the significance or importance of this text? You can find that stuff in the back matter. I know that when you're first reading this stuff, sometimes it can be intimidating, or the language can be difficult, and it can feel sometimes like a bit of a chore. But it's important to remember, I think, that lots of things that are good for us don't always feel good at first. If you're thinking about like exercise, right? When you first start exercising, you first start running or doing yoga, it doesn't always feel good at first. But the more you do them, the better you start to feel. And I think this can apply with reading too, when we're trying to change our reading habits. The more you read this stuff, the more comfortable you will become. And it's important to note, if you're reading and you don't understand parts of it, some of it, a lot of it, that's okay. Sometimes the language is archaic. Sometimes in works of philosophy, the language can be dense. In poetry, the diction can be very strange. It can be hard to understand what's going on. Even more difficult if you're not a native English speaker, this stuff can be really hard. But part of the reason to read this stuff is that it strengthens your thinking muscles. Part of the goal here is to stretch your brain. So if it's difficult, it's probably supposed to be a little difficult. So don't worry too much about that. And I'll tell you a secret. I'm a professor. I went to university for 9 years. I've been teaching for about 15 years. I read this stuff, and there's still things I don't understand. There are whole debates, professors, scholars writing essays and articles and books debating the meaning and interpretation of texts, of words, of particular ideas that these authors have. So if you're a beginner and you're reading this stuff and you're thinking, gee, I don't understand what this means, welcome to the club. Like, we're all trying to understand what this stuff means. And this may be the most important thing about starting to read classic literature or starting to read great books. You get to enter into this great conversation that has been going on for hundreds of years, in some cases, thousands of years. There is something profoundly moving about reading a book that was written 300, 500, 1,000 years ago, and hearing another person put into words something you have experienced but have never been able to articulate. To hear someone from long ago and far away describe your own thoughts and feelings, that is a profound experience. And it reminds us, I think, that we are all in this together as human beings living in this world. And that people everywhere, of course, we're very different in lots of ways, but in a lot of really fundamental ways, we are the same. And reading great books reminds us of that. Now, if you want specific book recommendations, you can find those in a video over here. I will see you there, and I'll talk to you soon.